The government keeps some secrets in its vaults. There are mysteries that historians have debated for generations. And then there are things that no child should know, things that a child remembers. In the spring of 2019, a family vacation turned into a nightmare. 5-year-old Ethan Miller suddenly stopped on the grassy knoll at Dealey Plaza. He began to describe a murder in great detail. It wasn't the murder everyone knew about. Ethan described the second shooter in the assassination. He began to talk about the murder that the Warren Commission dismissed, the one conspiracy theorists have whispered about for decades. He described the rifle model, the texture of the wooden fence, and the taste of fear in his mouth when the trigger was pulled. His family tried to silence him. Everyone who heard him started recording with their phones. A security guard approached him anxiously, but Ethan didn't stop. Pointing to a spot behind the fence, he said, "I buried it there. I buried it under the ground. I had to leave, but I buried it." What happened next would lead investigators to a buried box. It would lead to a secret FBI ballistics report. It would become a truth so dangerous that grown men would beg the family to drop the investigation. You are about to enter a documented case of impossible memory in modern history. What do you think about the reality of such events? The Miller family was an ordinary family living in Columbus, Ohio. David Miller worked for an insurance company. His wife Sarah worked as a third-grade teacher at a local elementary school. Their son Ethan was a bright child who showed no interest in history or politics. He had never watched any documentaries about JFK. He had never asked his family any questions about assassinations or conspiracies. In fact, the family rarely discussed current events. They preferred to keep their home life simple and predictable. The trip to Dallas in April 2019 was intended as a reward. David had signed an important deal. The company offered to send him and his family to a conference in Texas. Sarah saw this as an opportunity to introduce Ethan to American history. They visited the Fort Worth stockyards and the Dallas Arboretum. On their third day, they decided to tour Dealey Plaza. It was something tourists were supposed to do. Sarah had read that the sixth-floor museum was educational and suitable for children. She wanted Ethan to understand that history was real, that it happened in places that could still be visited and touched. Tourists were wandering around with their cameras and guidebooks. A street vendor was selling cold drinks at the corner of Elm and Houston. Ethan was walking across the plaza, holding his mother's hand. His sneakers scraped against the pavement. He looked fine. But when they reached the center of the plaza, something changed. Sarah was the first to notice. She felt Ethan's hand stiffen as she held it, his breathing becoming shallow and rapid. "Ethan, are you okay, sweetheart?" she asked. He didn't answer. His gaze was fixed on the grassy hill on the right. He was looking at that small, sloping hill that had been the focus of conspiracy theories for 50 years. His face was pale, his lips a thin line. David noticed it too. He approached and placed his hand on his son's shoulder. "Son, what is wrong? Do you want some water?" Ethan moved away from both of them and started walking toward the hill. He wasn't running, but walking with determined steps, as if he knew exactly where he was going. Sarah and David looked at each other in surprise. They followed him. With his small legs, he climbed the hill with steady steps. He stopped in front of the wooden fence stretching across the top of the hill. His hands gripped the worn wood. Then he began to cry. It wasn't the cry of a tired or upset child. It was something else. He was crying with deep, choking sobs that shook his whole body. Sarah ran to him. She wrapped her arms around his shoulders. But Ethan pushed her away. "Ethan, baby, what happened? What is wrong?" "I shouldn't have pulled the trigger," he said. David didn't understand what was happening at that moment. Sarah felt her stomach knot. A few nearby tourists turned and looked at them. Silence fell. A woman took out her phone and started recording. David moved quickly to shield his son from view. "Ethan, what are you talking about?" "What trigger?" The boy wiped his nose with the back of his hand. He pointed to a specific spot behind the fence, slightly to the left of where they were standing. "I was standing right there. The rifle was so heavy. My hands were shaking. They told me I had to do it. They said if I didn't, they would hurt my family." This wasn't a game. This wasn't something he saw on television. There was a weight in Ethan's voice that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. David crouched down in front of his son. "Ethan, listen to me. Who told you this? Did someone show you a video? Did you see this in a movie? Ethan shook his head. Number I was there on the 22nd of November 1963. It was cold. The motorcade was passing down the street. I could see the president's car. It was moving very slowly. I didn't want to do it, but they said they would kill my wife. They said they would kill my little girl. The words hung in the air like a physical thing. A 5-year-old boy was talking about his wife and daughter. He was describing an event that had happened 56 years ago. David's throat went dry. Sarah took Ethan in her arms. She held him tightly, as if she could protect him from what was happening, but Ethan continued talking. The rifle was a Remington 700. They gave it to me 2 days ago. I practiced in the woods. Then I buried it. I buried it underground because I couldn't take it with me. I had to leave the city, but I couldn't. I stayed and watched them blame him. I watched them blame Lee. David slowly stood up, his legs trembling. A security guard was approaching. His radio crackled. Sarah looked at her husband. Her face was wet with tears. David, what is happening to our son? But David had no answer, because a 5-year-old child should not know the name Lee Harvey Oswald. No child should know the model of a rifle that had never been publicly linked to the grassy knoll. And no family vacation should end with the realization that it carried the memories of a murder your son should never have been a part of. But this was only the beginning. The Millers couldn't sleep that night. They returned silently to their hotel room. After crying for hours, Ethan's breathing finally steadied. Sarah held her hand on his chest, feeling it rise and fall. David sat down at his bedside, opening his laptop. He searched for answers he knew he wouldn't find. He rephrased the same question in different ways. Child remembers past life. Reincarnation cases. Second shooter on the grassy knoll. The results consisted of conspiracy theory sites, debunked theories, and a handful of academic articles on childhood false memory syndrome. By morning, Sarah had made up her mind. We need to talk to someone, she said. An expert, a psychologist, we need to talk to someone who can explain this. David nodded, but he wasn't sure what kind of expert could explain why a 5-year-old would know the name Lee Harvey Oswald. They found Dr. Patricia Henshaw. Dr. Henshaw was a child psychologist based in Dallas, specializing in trauma and dissociative disorders. Her office was located in a modest building near SMU. It was filled with soft lighting and colorful toys to put children at ease. When the Miller family arrived at the office that afternoon, Dr. Henshaw greeted them with a warm smile. She had heard strange stories before, but the urgency in Sarah's voice on the phone had unsettled her. Ethan was sitting on the floor of the office, building a tower out of blocks. Dr. Henshaw listened to the parents recount what had happened at Dealey Plaza. He took notes in a leather-bound notebook. His face wore a carefully neutral expression. When they finished speaking, he put down his pen. He clasped his hands in his lap. Mr. and Mrs. Miller, he began gently, what you've told me is very sad, but you need to understand that children, especially those Ethan's age, have incredibly vivid imaginations. They absorb information from their surroundings in ways we don't always notice. A conversation overheard in a restaurant, a documentary playing in the background at a relative's house. These pieces can come together in a child's mind and emerge as memories. Sarah leaned forward, her voice tense. But he knew certain things, specific things. He knew the date, the rifle model. He mentioned a wife and daughter. Dr. Henshaw shook his head slowly. Children often reenact adult scenarios. It is part of their cognitive development. The details you described could have come from many sources. The JFK assassination is one of the most documented events in American history. It is in textbooks, movies, documentaries. It is entirely possible that Ethan came across this information without you realizing it. David replied, I don't mean to be disrespectful, doctor, but my son hasn't watched any documentaries about JFK. We don't talk about politics at home. He is 5 years old. He watches cartoons and plays with Legos. I understand that this is a difficult situation to accept, but it requires us to abandon everything we know about how memory and consciousness work, that your son is experiencing real memories from a past life. As a scientist, I hope you understand that I cannot take that step without extraordinary evidence. He turned his attention to Ethan, who had finished his tower and was now quietly humming to himself. Ethan, can you come over here for a minute? Ethan looked at his mother. He climbed onto the chair next to Dr. Henshaw. His legs dangled. Dr. Henshaw pulled out a file. He showed him a series of black and white photographs inside. I am going to show you some photos, okay? I want you to tell me if you recognize any of these places. The first photo was a street-level shot of the Texas Schoolbook Depository. Ethan glanced at the photo. He shook his head. The second was an aerial photo of Dealey Plaza. This time he looked at the photo longer and frowned. That is where it happened, he said quietly. Dr. Henshaw took note. The third photo was a close-up of the grassy knoll. However, it was taken from a different angle than tourists usually saw it. Ethan's finger immediately pointed to a spot just behind the fence. I was standing right there. Dr. Henshaw pulled out another photo, this one of a completely different place, a park in Houston. What about this one? He asked. Ethan looked at the photo. Number that is not right. He showed him 3 more photos. All of them were misleading. Ethan rejected them without hesitation each time. But when he showed him a photo of the wooden fence as it was in 1963, Ethan's hands began to tremble. That is exactly how it looked. Dr. Henshaw closed the file and leaned back in his chair. His confidence was slightly shaken. He asked him about the rifle. You said it was a Remington 700. Can you describe it to me? Ethan's voice was firm. It was brown. The wood was dark. It had a scope, but it wasn't very good. The plus sign was a bit blurry. I had to guess. Sarah felt the room sway. David's hands gripped the chair tightly. Dr. Henshaw cleared his throat. Ethan, do you remember what happened next? What happened after you fired? He shook his head slowly. I ran. I took the rifle and ran behind the trains. There were cars there, big cars. I dug a hole with my hands next to a fence post. The ground was hard. First, I put the rifle in a green bag. Then I covered it up. I left there. I had to leave town, but I couldn't. I stayed in a motel. I watched the news. Then they shot him. They shot Lee, and I knew they would come after me. The room fell silent. Dr. Henshaw's pen seemed frozen on his notebook. Mr. and Mrs. Miller, I think we need to take this further. What Ethan has described is highly unusual. I would like to consult with a colleague, Dr. Raymond Colfax. He is a professor of psychology at the University of Virginia. He has studied cases of children who claim to remember past lives. He is the only person who can help us understand what is happening here. 3 days later, the Miller family was on a plane back to Dallas. This time, Dr. Colfax was with them. Dr. Colfax had spent 40 years documenting the past life memories of children, mostly from cultures where reincarnation is widely accepted. But this case was different. This was America. This child had no religious framework for past lives. And this was the JFK assassination, the most investigated crime in modern history. Dr. Colfax questioned Ethan for hours. He recorded every word. He asked questions to trick a child who was merely repeating what he had heard. But Ethan never hesitated. He described the weight of the rifle, the sound it made when fired, the smell of gunpowder mixed with the scent of freshly cut grass. He described the men who hired him, but he couldn't clearly remember their faces. He described the fear, the guilt, the sleepless nights that followed. On the 4th day, Dr. Colfax made a decision. We have to go back to the grassy knoll, he said. If Ethan really buried something there, we need to know. The family returned to Dealey Plaza early in the morning before the tourists arrived. The air was cool. Ethan walked ahead of them again, his small body moving with the same eerie determination. He stopped in front of the fence, counted 4 posts to the left. He pointed to the spot. I buried it here. Dr. Colfax knelt down and examined the soil. It looked no different from the other patches of soil in the plaza. But when he pressed his hand on it, he felt something hard just below the surface. He looked at David. Do you have a shovel in your car? David nodded. Then we'll need permission to dig and we'll need witnesses. What they uncovered would change everything. It took 6 weeks to obtain permission to excavate on federal property. 6 weeks of phone calls, legal consultations, and mounting media interest. The news had leaked, first a local news channel, then a regional outlet, and finally a national network reported it. When the excavation permit was granted, cameras were everywhere. The National Park Service sent a representative. The Dallas Police Department sent 2 officers. Dr. Colfax insisted on bringing his own team of archaeologists and forensic experts. The Miller family waited at the edge of the cordoned-off area. Other people watched Ethan prepare to dig where he had indicated. It was June. The weather in Texas was extremely hot. David's back was soaked with sweat as he watched the team set up their equipment. Sarah looked at Ethan, checking his face for any signs of distress. But he seemed calm, almost relaxed, as if he had been waiting for this moment his entire short life. The archaeologist, a woman named Dr. Lisa Tran, drew a grid with stakes and ropes. She worked slowly and methodically. It was as if this were a routine excavation. She acted as if this were not an effort to uncover potential evidence in America's most famous unsolved murder case. They began carefully scanning the area Ethan had indicated. They started with a ground-penetrating radar scan. The data flickered on the screen. Then it stopped. "There is something here," she said. "About 45 centimeters deep, dense. Metallic." The murmur of the crowd grew louder. Dr. Colfax stepped forward, hands behind his back, his face expressionless. Sarah felt her knees tremble. David gripped Ethan's shoulder tighter. Dr. Tran and his team began digging. They carefully removed the soil in layers. They swept the soil with soft tools designed to protect whatever lay beneath. Cameras moved closer. Police officers stepped forward to push the crowd back. 20 minutes later, Dr. Tran's brush struck something hard. He continued more carefully. He revealed the edge of a dark, rectangular object. It was wrapped in what looked like a decayed canvas, a green canvas, faded and deteriorated from decades underground. He looked at Dr. Colfax. "We need to document this before continuing." Photographers approached and took pictures from every angle. A cameraman recorded the moment Dr. Tran carefully lifted the package from the soil with his gloved hands. The people present at the scene were immediately removed. The media was removed. No one should know the truth of what happened in this incident. The canvas that emerged from the soil was heavier than it appeared. He carried it to a folding table set up under the tent, away from direct sunlight. The crowd surged forward, but the police held them back. Only Dr. Colfax, the Miller family, and a handful of officials were allowed to get close enough to see. Dr. Tran carefully cut the canvas with a scalpel. He peeled back the layers. And there, somehow preserved despite the years, was a rifle wrapped in tarpaulin. It was as if the air had been knocked out of Sarah. David's face drained. Ethan, standing on tiptoe to see over the table, just nodded. "This is it," he whispered. Dr. Tran examined the weapon with practiced precision. He photographed every inch before touching it. "It is a Remington 700, he said. "Bolt-action rifle. The serial number is still visible." He read the serial number aloud, and someone in the background immediately began searching the database. The scope was still attached, the plus sign visible through the dusty lens. Ethan was right. The pluses were blurred, slightly shifted. But what would make this discovery less shocking and more impossible was yet to come. Inside the canvas tucked under the rifle was a small notebook. The pages were water-damaged and brittle, but they were still legible. Dr. Colfax carefully opened the notebook with his gloved hands. Dates, names, instructions. And on the last page, written in a shaky hand, was a single sentence. "God forgive me for what they made me do." The notebook was immediately seized by federal agents who had arrived a few minutes earlier. The agents' presence was sudden and inexplicable, but Dr. Colfax had seen enough. He had taken enough photographs, and what he saw on those pages matched details never disclosed to the public. It matched details found only in classified government files. 3 days after the discovery, a lawyer contacted the Miller family. Jonathan Pierce represented a group he described only as interested parties with access to historical records. He arrived at their hotel room with a briefcase and a look that suggested he wanted to be somewhere else. He sat down across from David and Sarah at the small table by the window. He opened the briefcase. Inside was a single document stamped in faded red letters, confidential. For eyes only, a ballistics report prepared by the FBI in December 1963. It was never included in the Warren Commission's final report. It was never made public. Very few people know it exists. He slid the document across the table. David took it with trembling hands. The report detailed the analysis of bullet fragments recovered from Dealey Plaza. They had been retrieved from the wooden fence on the grassy knoll, not from the president's body or limousine. The report concluded that these fragments did not come from Lee Harvey Oswald's Mannlicher Carcano rifle. The rifle was described as probably a bolt-action hunting rifle, probably a Remington 700 or similar model. The report also noted that the bullet's trajectory was inconsistent with the window on the 6th floor of the book depository. This indicated a second shooter behind the fence. And then, in the final paragraph, a directive stamp was applied to the report. The investigation has been suspended by order of the Department of Defense. The evidence will be archived. No further action will be taken. Sarah covered her mouth with her hands. David looked at Jonathan Pierce. Why are you showing us this? Pierce closed the briefcase. Because the rifle your son brought us matches the specifications in this report exactly. The serial number was identified. The weapon was purchased in September 1963 by a man whose name I cannot disclose, but who was connected to intelligence operations during the Cold War. This man disappeared in November 1963. His body was found 3 months later in a motel room in Fort Worth. The official cause of death was recorded as suicide. Sarah reached for Ethan, pulled him into her lap, and hugged him as if he might vanish. Pierce stood up and adjusted his tie. The people I represent want you to know that this matter is now closed. The rifle has been seized by federal authorities. The notebook has been classified as a confidential document. You will not disclose this matter to the public. You will not give interviews. Otherwise, there will be legal consequences. Do you understand? This was a bigger issue than them. It was a truth the government had buried once and would bury again. After Pierce left, the family sat in silence. Ethan got down from his mother's lap. He walked to the window and looked at the Dallas skyline. I don't remember his name anymore. I don't remember the man I used to be. I don't remember his face. But I remember the guilt. I remember being very afraid. He turned to his family and smiled for the first time since the journey began. But it is gone now. I don't have to carry it anymore. Dr. Colfax visited them the next morning. He sat with Ethan for an hour, asking gentle questions, taking notes. When he was done, he shook David's hand and placed his hand on Ethan's head. What you've done here is extraordinary. Whether the world believes it or not, I believe it, and I will document it. Because the truth matters. The Miller family returned to Columbus at the end of June. Citing family reasons, they took Ethan out of kindergarten early. Throughout the summer, they tried to return to normal life. Media requests never stopped. Documentary filmmakers wanted interviews. Podcasters left voicemails. Conspiracy theorists sent threatening letters. David changed his phone numbers twice. Sarah took leave from teaching. Ethan, however, seemed to have forgotten. Slowly, like a dream fading in the morning light, the memories began to disappear. By his 6th birthday, he could no longer describe the rifle. By his 7th, he couldn't remember Lee Harvey Oswald's name. By the time he turned 8, when his family gently asked him about Dallas, he said, I really don't remember. It feels like a movie I watched a long time ago. Dr. Colfax remained in contact. He published an article titled, The Dealey Plaza Case, a study of past life memories in childhood and physical verification in the Journal of Scientific Exploration. The article was peer-reviewed. It was widely cited. It was largely ignored by mainstream academia. However, for those willing to look, for those who understand that the universe may be stranger and more merciful than we believe, this article was a quiet turning point. Proof that some things cannot be explained. Proof that memory, consciousness, and identity can transcend the boundaries we draw around them. He never spoke publicly about what happened in Dallas. Some mysteries are not meant to be solved. Some truths are too dangerous to be spoken aloud. But this much is certain. On a spring day in 2019, a 5-year-old child led investigators to a rifle that had been buried for 56 years. This rifle matched a secret FBI report. A rifle that proves what conspiracy theorists have been whispering for decades. There was a second shooter on the grassy knoll, and the truth of the 22nd of November, 1963, was far more complex and tragic than the official story allowed. If you don't believe Ethan Miller carried that shooter's memories throughout his life, the evidence is there. You might think it is a coincidence, but the rifle and the reports exist. Somewhere in the federal government's archives, there is a notebook containing a final, desperate prayer. God forgive me for what they made me do. We may never know the full truth of what happened in Dallas that day, but we do know this: memory is never confined to a single life. Guilt does not always die with the body. And sometimes the universe gives a child the chance to speak a truth that history tried to bury. What do you think about Ethan's memories from his past life? Do you think it is just an extraordinary coincidence? And if this story has started to question what you thought you knew about life, death, and the mysteries that connect them, subscribe to this channel, because the truth is still there, waiting in the shadows of history, and we're just beginning to uncover it.